Sixers win it! Wow!
Oh man, Embiid just posterized Russell Westbrook.
You love the Philadelphia Eagles? Let me get a hell yeah!
What's going on, guys? What's happening? Welcome to another edition of Party on Broad. It is Dibes, Mr. Crockpot on Twitter. Today we are talking NHL draft prospects. Joining us today is my man Tyson. Follow him on Twitter at Quibel Tyson, and also follow thepaintlines.com to check out his top 100 NHL draft prospect rankings. What's going on, Tyson?
Not much. Excited to talk about a draft that might be happening in a matter of weeks. We still don't have any idea. This is a rather strange time to be in, so the NHL can't make up their minds. So we could be having a draft in 2 or 3 weeks. We may not have it till August. Nobody knows right now.
Yeah, so we have no idea if the draft is happening or not, when it's happening. But what we do know is this man, Alexis Lafrenière, is the projected number 1 pick in the 2020 NHL draft. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about his strengths, his weaknesses, and the best fits for this guy moving forward. Tyson, is this guy far and away the best talent in this year's draft?
I wouldn't say far and away, but he is definitely at this moment a step ahead of the guy I have ranked number 2, and enough anyway. Though it is a little bit hard to project this year because the way they do NHL draft classes is based on age, not based upon when you declare, like in other sports. And so for Lafrenière as the number 1 ranked prospect, he's almost a year older than the player ranked number 2 behind him. And he has almost another full year of development under his belt. And so he was on another level this year in terms of how good he was. But I think there's maybe less of a drop between the guy who's ranked number 2, who is almost exactly a year younger and has had a 1 year less of development than he has. So he, I would say right now, is the best player available for sure. He's the consensus number 1, as in I've only seen one public list of probably 15 or so. Shout out to Cam Robinson, who has a different guy ranked number 1 who's taking a big chance on that. But everyone else has Lafrenière as the consensus, and NHL Central Scouting, the NHL's paid scouting service that they have him 1. And it would appear that across the board, more or less, that's the consensus. So it's not a knock on Lafrenière to say there's a little bit of less of a drop to number 2 from himself, but it is to say it may not be as slam dunk as some have envisioned, but he still is the top, in my opinion.
Awesome. Tell the fans a little bit what we should know about this guy.
Yeah, so he is a super well-rounded player, as in there are not many weaknesses to his game, but there also may not be the same amount of flair you might expect from a guy. Like, unfortunately, this is what we tend to do. Oh, number 1 ranked prospect. He must be Connor McDavid, or he must be Sidney Crosby, or Nathan McKinnon. And we go down these lists of these high-flying, crazy, elite-type players. And reality is there's just a small handful of those. So, like, Jack Hughes went first overall last year. Most people are kind of like, wait, did he play last year? Because unless you're following the Devils, you didn't see much of him. And he did not put up a lot of points, but he is still a solid NHL player that in a few years I think will be a first-line solid contributor for the Devils. It's just different draft years, different players. And so Lafrenière is, I would say, a step up from Jack Hughes in terms of skill level. I don't think I would have said that a year ago. I'm saying that now. And I think that he's just a very well-rounded guy. There isn't a lot of weaknesses to it. He does have an elite skill set still. He has excellent hands. He has excellent offensive awareness. At the World Juniors, playing as a barely 18-year-old, he was the MVP, even though he missed like 3 games with an injury. He played injured and came back and led the tournament in scoring and was just completely dominant. And so he has really good strength too for someone as young as his age. And he's just a monster offensively. So it is really hard to find knocks in his game at all. He's a very high level talent. He's a play driver. He will be a first line player. He will be in the NHL next year without question.
As talented as he is at scoring, like what I find so interesting about Lafrenière is his rare ability, that rare combination of hockey IQ and that pass first mentality for a number 1 pick. I find that really, really intriguing. Tyson, like, what are some of his main strengths that are going to really make him stand out amongst the crowd?
Yeah, it's how he can play in every zone. Kind of like you said, he's not afraid to make a quick pass out of his own zone, which sometimes guys just like to carry and carry and carry that are top ranked. And there's times when he does, but he uses his teammates extremely well to get out of trouble, to get out of traffic areas. So that's a really, really solid portion of his game. He uses his strength exceptionally well for someone of his age. So he might be behind the net, and at the World Juniors, you saw this. There's kids almost 2 years older than him. They were trying to knock him off the puck, and they just couldn't. And so what that does is that just puts him in positions down low to draw in defenders using his strength, not necessarily his speed, but his strength to create space for his teammates and set them up. He has an excellent release, excellent shot. He's not afraid to utilize it in all positions. He isn't afraid to jump into the center of the ice with the puck on his stick, even if it means he might get hit. I've seen him get hit doing that many times, but he isn't afraid to do it. His head's always up. He's always aware of where everyone else is around the ice. There's a lot of different comparables to him. I don't always like making comparables, but the one that I heard recently from a scout, which makes sense, is like Jonathan Huberdeau on Florida, who's been a top 10 NHL scorer the last 2 seasons or so, where he's not like, again, the flashiest guy that you'll see, but he's just really good coming off the wing at setting up his teammates, putting up well over a point per game, and contributes in all zones. And so that's what a lot of people are saying is probably the best comparison, and I would tend to agree. If I look at the NHL, that's probably the closest we have as in terms of style of play.
This seems like the Ben Simmons, Brandon Ingram draft all over again, where you have a clear-cut number one guy that's a pass-first mentality dude, and then you have some experts claiming that Brandon Ingram should be the number one pick, although that was complete crap.
We know that now.
The similarities are shocking. So let's then move on to weaknesses. Tyson, what are some areas, you touched on it a little bit, what are some areas that Lafrenière kind of needs to address moving forward?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with his skating. Like, I think he's an NHL level skater. I think if he can improve it a little bit, perhaps like at quicker acceleration, higher top speed, I think teams especially would appreciate that are in that potential lottery pick slot. I think that's a weapon that he could have. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a weakness. It's a question that I have, is that I'm not sure that he has the highest ceiling of offensively of players in this draft. And so it's a little weird for the first overall pick in some ways. And again, it's not a knock on him. It's just to say he might be a player that comes in next year in the NHL and puts up really good numbers and then basically puts up those same or maybe only 10 to 15 more points at its highest point in a season over the next 10 years. Like, he may just come in and be the same type of player for the most part with a low, slow, higher, slight projection in terms of offense, but he may never be, this 100 some point guy at the NHL level. And so I don't know if you call that a weakness. It's just like he's really good right now, and he just may not get a whole lot better, and that's okay. It just may be a perceived weakness if there's guys not lower down in the draft at picks potentially 2 or 3 that could potentially have higher offensive seasons. I don't know if I would call that a weakness, but that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately is what is his ceiling? I think it's still high. I just don't know that it's 100 points, and he could be surpassed by someone else lower than him.
Do you expect him to immediately play in the NHL next year?
Yeah, I mean, if they're talking about changing the lottery too right now, where the Red Wings are basically guaranteed the number 1 or the number 2 slot. And so if he gets picked by the Red Wings or Ottawa, which basically has the highest other odds, they're terrible. And so even if he wasn't good, he would be inserted in the lineup. But if any of the 31 NHL teams drafted him, I mean, he's already played 3 years of junior. There's no point in sending him back. He's ready physically. He's ready mentally. He's ready.
All right, let's talk best fits. Right now, you saw the Detroit Red Wings. They have the best odds right now, but they're followed by Ottawa, LA, Anaheim, and then New Jersey. Of all those teams, is there a best fit for Lafreniere's talents?
I mean, I think that's a good question. I think any of them. I mean, he's a play driver himself. He can drive a line. He's not a center. He's a winger. And so I think an ideal situation for him to thrive would be if he had a good center to work with. Unfortunately, none of those teams do. In the NHL in particular, depth at center, depth on defense tend to lead to championships. So in the Pittsburgh model, when they won those back-to-backs, it was Crosby, Malkin in the middle, and then another player as their third line, usually center Bonino, with playing with Kessel in that line. A lot of other teams have followed that model, and so that's more or less been the case. But there are other cases as well, like the Blackhawks with Patrick Kane. He's a big play driver on his own line, separate from Taves a lot. So I could see Lafrenière being in that situation. So I would personally love to see him on an original six team. I'm a fan of seeing those classic teams. The Wings fans, they went 20 years in a row making the playoffs and have just been awful for the last couple. And they're going to be bad for a few more too. I mean, they're at the cap max and had the lowest number of points in like forever as a team. And so they're going to be close to the cap max again next year. And so they need some excitement in their franchise.
Okay.
And people like the Red Wings. Ottawa, their owner, a lot of people are like, so they're not as big a fan as that. But again, they would benefit as well.
All right. Last question. And I got to ask you this. When you think of household names who are number one picks, you immediately think of Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, Taylor Hall. Where does Alexis Lafrenière rank among that company as prospects? And what do you want to see from him in 2020?
That's a good question. He's definitely below, I think, all those players that you named. Hall maybe being the exception. And the difference with Hall is that Hall obviously has a super elite skill set in his speed. And that is an amazing thing that he has. And depending on who he plays with, his offense is just all over the map, where he won a Hart Trophy, and the next year you're like, where'd he go? And so Lafrenière, I think, will be consistent, a consistent scorer, but he will be below that group. So I think he'll be ahead of Jack Hughes. He'll definitely be ahead of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, which is a lot of people are like, wait, that was a first overall pick? Yes, it was. Or Nail Yakupov, who's not even in the league anymore, and it wasn't even that long ago. He's definitely well ahead of those groups. He will be a solid first-line NHL player. I just don't think he has that franchise tag that you would give a Crosby or a McDavid. I think he's below that. He's going to be a very good player. He's going to put very good points. Whatever team's going to be happy to have him, but do not expect a Crosby, McDavid, or an Ovechkin out of this type of guy.
Awesome. So that is Tyson. Follow him on Twitter at Quibell. Tyson, check out at thepaintlines.com his top 100 rankings of the NHL draft prospects. For Tyson, for myself, thanks for watching, guys. Stay awesome.
Sixers win it! Wow! Oh, man, Embiid just posterized Russell Westbrook